When my son told me, "You'll be dead soon anyway," during what should have been a loving family dinner, I decided to show him exactly what soon could mean for his inheritance. So I gave his entire $2.3 million estate to my golden retriever, Duchess. At 70 years old, I thought I'd raised a man with compassion and gratitude. But what happened that evening at Grandview Manor shocked me to my core and changed the course of our family legacy forever. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this reaches. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have something even more extraordinary to share with you. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, and I never imagined that the son I'd sacrificed everything for would look me in the eye during our traditional Sunday dinner and dismiss my life as if it were already over. Standing in the elegant dining room of my estate in Rosewood Hills last month, watching my son Marcus gesture dismissively at my concerns about his reckless spending while telling me I'd be dead soon anyway, I realized that everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and respect was about to be tested in ways I never could have anticipated. The evening had started with such hope. November in Rosewood Hills was always magical, with the century-old maple trees lining Heritage Drive turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The entire neighborhood looked like something from a Hallmark movie, with its Georgian mansions and perfectly manicured gardens that real estate photographers traveled from across the state to capture. The historic district where I lived had been featured in Architectural Digest twice, and tourists regularly drove through our tree-lined streets just to admire the pristine examples of early American architecture that had been lovingly preserved for generations. My own estate, Grandview Manor, sat majestically on the corner of Heritage Drive and Magnolia Lane. Its imposing brick facade and white columns commanded respect from everyone who passed by. The circular driveway, lined with perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges, led to a front entrance that had welcomed governors, senators, and business leaders for over 4 decades. Every detail of the property reflected the success that my late husband Robert and I had achieved through nearly 45 years of relentless hard work and unwavering dedication to excellence. I had been looking forward to this dinner for weeks. Marcus had specifically requested our traditional Sunday gathering, saying he wanted to discuss some important family matters and his vision for our family's future. As someone who had spent 43 years building Whitmore Industries from a single bakery into the largest specialty food manufacturing company in the tri-state area, I was genuinely excited to hear about Marcus's plans and perhaps discuss how our family's wealth could be used to create lasting positive impact. At 70, I still maintained an active role in the company's charitable foundation, overseeing our scholarship programs that had sent over 300 underprivileged students to college, our community development initiatives that had revitalized 3 struggling neighborhoods, and our small business mentorship program that had helped launch 127 successful enterprises. The work gave me purpose and kept me connected to the values that Robert and I had built our empire upon: integrity, generosity, and the belief that success meant nothing if it wasn't shared with others. I had spent the entire Saturday preparing Marcus's favorite meal: herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables from my own greenhouse, wild rice pilaf with cranberries and pecans, and the chocolate soufflé that had been his birthday request every year since he was 8. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's Royal Crown Derby china, the same pattern that had graced our table for every important family celebration for 3 generations. Each piece told a story: the soup tureen that had survived the Great Depression, the serving platters that were wedding gifts when Grandma married in 1923, the delicate teacups that had been used to toast every graduation, wedding, and business milestone in our family's history. Fresh white roses from my prize-winning greenhouse adorned the centerpiece, their subtle fragrance filling the room with the same elegant atmosphere that had made our Sunday dinners feel like the most important part of my week. The dining room itself was a testament to our family's journey and values. Hand-painted murals depicting the four seasons decorated the walls, commissioned by a local artist during our company's 10th anniversary year. The mahogany table could seat 12 comfortably, and over the years it had hosted countless celebrations, business discussions, and family meetings that had shaped the direction of both our personal lives and our company's growth. French doors opened onto the garden terrace, where Robert and I used to sit after dinner, planning our next business expansion or discussing our dreams for Marcus's future. The view from those doors encompassed 12 acres of carefully landscaped grounds, including formal gardens that had been featured in Better Homes and Gardens, a reflecting pool that attracted rare birds during migration season, and the greenhouse where I still spend hours nurturing the orchids that had become my passion after Robert's death.
But the true crown jewel of Grandview Manor was the library, Robert's sanctuary, and the room where we had made every major decision that built our fortune. Floored-ceiling shelves held not just my collection of first-edition novels and Robert's business books, but also the leather-bound journals where we had documented every significant moment in our company's growth. Annual reports dating back to our first year of operations sat alongside handwritten notes from our earliest employees, thank you letters from scholarship recipients, and newspaper clippings chronicling our rise from local bakery owners to regional business leaders. The massive oak desk where Robert had worked late into the night for decades still held his favorite fountain pen, the same one he had used to sign our first major distribution contract. The walls displayed awards from the Regional Business Association, photographs with 3 different governors, framed articles from Forbes featuring our company's innovative, sustainable packaging initiatives, and the certificate declaring us Family Business of the Year from the National Business Council, an honor that had meant more to Robert than any financial milestone we had achieved. Whitmore Industries wasn't just a business. It was a legacy that Robert and I had built from absolutely nothing, sustained through economic recessions, industry changes, and personal tragedies that would have destroyed weaker partnerships. We started in 1980 with a $5,000 loan for my father and the dream of creating artisanal baked goods that could compete with mass-produced alternatives while maintaining the quality and care that only came from hands-on craftsmanship. I remember those early mornings when we would arrive at our tiny bakery on Elm Street at 4 a.m., mixing dough by hand because we couldn't afford industrial equipment, kneading until our arms ached, and carefully monitoring every oven temperature because each batch represented a significant portion of our daily revenue. Robert would handle the books and delivery schedules, while I perfected recipes and managed relationships with our growing list of restaurant clients who had begun to depend on our consistent quality and reliability. We delivered fresh bread and pastries to local restaurants in our beat-up station wagon, the same car we had bought used for our honeymoon road trip, because we couldn't afford delivery trucks or even part-time drivers. I would ride shotgun with clipboards full of invoices while Robert navigated the early morning streets, both of us exhausted but exhilarated by the growing demand for products we had created with our own hands. Those early years had been financially brutal, but emotionally fulfilling in ways that our later success never quite matched. We lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above the bakery, the smell of yeast and cinnamon permanently embedded in our clothes and furniture. Our date nights consisted of working side by side until midnight, then sharing leftover pastries and instant coffee while planning the next day's production schedule. We survived on day-old bread and whatever pastries hadn't sold, putting every spare dollar back into better ingredients, improved equipment, or the expansion that would allow us to serve more customers. I learned to stretch our grocery budget to $15 a week, becoming creative with beans, rice, and whatever produce was marked down at the local market. Robert took on bookkeeping for other small businesses to generate additional income, working by lamplight at our kitchen table after 12-hour days at the bakery. But our sacrifices had been driven by a shared vision that extended far beyond personal comfort. We dreamed of creating a company that would provide good jobs for our community, support local farmers by sourcing ingredients regionally, and prove that quality craftsmanship could compete with mass production in an increasingly industrial food market. Every 18-hour day, Every missed social event, every luxury we forewent was an investment in something bigger than ourselves. Our breakthrough came in 1985 when Millbrook Country Club requested custom desserts for their annual charity gala. The event attracted business leaders from across the region, and by the end of the evening, we had received orders that would triple our monthly revenue. Word spread quickly about the little bakery that created magic, and suddenly we were fielding calls from corporate clients, wedding planners, and specialty food distributors who had heard about our reputation for excellence. By 1990, we owned 3 retail locations and had secured contracts with major regional grocery chains who wanted to offer their customers alternatives to mass-produced baked goods. Our Whitmore's Artisanal Collection became a premium brand that customers sought out specifically, allowing us to command higher prices while maintaining the quality standards that had built our reputation. The growth required constant reinvestment and careful financial management. Every expansion decision was debated extensively in our library, with Robert's analytical mind balancing my creative instincts to ensure we never grew faster than our ability to maintain quality. We hired slowly and carefully, looking for employees who shared our commitment to excellence rather than simply needing jobs. By 2000, Whitmore Industries employed over 200 people and generated $15 million in annual revenue. But more importantly, we had created a company culture that treated employees like family members rather than interchangeable resources. Our workers received profit-sharing bonuses, comprehensive health benefits, and education assistance for their children. The company picnic was a genuine celebration where Robert and I knew not just every employee's name, but their spouses' names and their children's achievements.
When Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack 6 years ago, found at his desk in the library, apparently working on plans for a new employee wellness program, the company was producing specialty foods for national distribution, employed 500 people across 4 facilities, and generated over $180 million annually. His funeral drew over 1,200 people, including employees, past and present, community leaders, and business partners who had been touched by his integrity and generosity. The grief nearly destroyed me. Robert hadn't just been my business partner and husband, he had been my best friend, my advisor, and the person who made every success meaningful because it was shared. For months after his death, I struggled to find purpose in the business that had been our shared passion for over 4 decades. But gradually, I discovered that continuing Robert's legacy through the company and our charitable foundation provided a way to honor his memory while remaining connected to the community he had loved so deeply. The work kept me busy, engaged, and surrounded by people who shared our values and remembered Robert's impact on their lives. Marcus had grown up surrounded by the business, spending summers working in our facilities and learning every aspect of food production and distribution. As a child, he had loved visiting the bakeries, wearing a small apron while helping employees package cookies, and asking endless questions about ingredient sourcing and quality control. During high school, he worked part-time in our shipping department, learning logistics and developing relationships with drivers and warehouse staff who had watched him grow up. I had hoped these experiences would teach him the value of hard work, the importance of treating employees like family, and the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful rather than simply inheriting wealth. When he graduated from Stanford with an MBA, Marcus had seemed eager to join the company full-time and eventually assume leadership responsibilities that would continue our family's legacy of ethical business practices and community engagement. His business school professors had praised his analytical abilities and strategic thinking, and I had been proud to introduce him to industry colleagues as the future of Whitmore Industries. During his first year with the company, he had shown genuine interest in learning our operations, understanding our company culture, and developing relationships with long-term employees who remembered teaching him to operate machinery when he was barely tall enough to reach the controls. But over the past 2 years, I had begun noticing troubling changes in Marcus's attitude and priorities. The enthusiastic young man who used to ask thoughtful questions about sustainable business practices and employee welfare had been replaced by someone who seemed more interested in maximizing short-term profits than in maintaining the relationships and values that had built our success. He had started making comments about streamlining operations and right-sizing our workforce, corporate buzzwords that made me uncomfortable because they suggested he viewed our employees as expenses to be minimized rather than people whose livelihoods depended on our continued success. When I questioned him about these ideas, he would dismiss my concerns as generational differences in management philosophy or resistance to necessary modernization. Marcus had also begun pushing for changes to our charitable giving, arguing that we were overinvested in community programs that don't provide measurable returns on investment. He wanted to reduce our scholarship program, eliminate the small business mentorship initiative, and redirect foundation money toward more strategic philanthropic opportunities that would enhance our corporate brand. The language he used made charity sound like marketing rather than genuine commitment to helping others. Most troubling of all, he had started making casual references to his inheritance and the changes he would implement when the company transitions to new leadership. These comments suggested he was already planning my retirement, or worse, simply waiting for my death so he could remake the business according to his own priorities without interference from outdated values or emotional attachments to employees and traditions. Still, when he requested the special Sunday dinner, I had hoped it represented a positive development. Perhaps he wanted to discuss his long-term vision for the company in a way that incorporated our family's values. Perhaps he had finally matured enough to understand that inheriting a business meant accepting responsibility for the people and community that had made our success possible. I had prepared for the evening with genuine excitement, imagining conversations about new product lines, expansion opportunities, or innovative employee benefit programs that would position Whitmore Industries for another generation of ethical growth and community impact. In my most optimistic moments, I pictured Marcus proposing marriage to his long-term girlfriend Sarah, or announcing plans to start a family that would represent the next generation of Whitmores committed to building something meaningful rather than simply consuming inherited wealth. As I put the finishing touches on our table setting that Sunday afternoon, with Duchess lying contentedly by the fireplace and the aroma of herb-crusted salmon filling the dining room, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life Robert and I had built together. Our home was a testament to the American dream, proof that hard work, integrity, and genuine care for others could create lasting success that benefited entire communities.
I had no idea that I was about to discover just how wrong I could be about someone I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. The conversation that would change everything was about to begin. And within minutes, it would reveal a side of my son that would force me to make the most difficult decision of my life. A decision that would protect everything Robert and I had built, while teaching Marcus a lesson about respect that he would never forget. Little did he know that by the end of that evening, his entire future would be resting in the paws of a golden retriever who had shown me more loyalty in 3 years than he had demonstrated in 35. The battle for our family's legacy was about to begin, and I intended to make sure the right values won. The foundation of my story begins not with that devastating Sunday dinner, but with understanding exactly what Marcus stood to inherit, and why his cruel words cut so deeply into everything I had spent 7 decades building. To truly appreciate the magnitude of what happened that November evening, you need to understand the empire that Robert and I created from nothing, the values we instilled in every brick and board of our legacy, and the careful plans I had made to ensure our family's wealth would continue serving others long after I was gone. Grandview Manor itself represented just a fraction of the Whitmore family fortune, but it embodied everything we valued about success with purpose. The 12-acre estate had been purchased in 1995, during what Robert called our arrival moment, the year when Whitmore Industries' revenue first exceeded $50 million, and we realized we had transcended our wildest dreams of financial security. But even as we planned our dream home, we remained committed to the principles that had built our success. Every contractor we hired was a local business owner.
Every material we used was sourced from regional suppliers, and every design decision reflected our belief that true luxury came from quality craftsmanship rather than ostentatious display. The house took 3 years to complete, not because of delays or budget constraints, but because we insisted on perfection in every detail while supporting the community that had supported our growth. The Georgian architecture was Robert's choice. He had always admired the classical proportions and timeless elegance of early American design. But the sustainable systems were my contribution. Geothermal heating and cooling, solar panels disguised within the roofline, rainwater collection systems that irrigated our gardens, and energy-efficient windows that reduced our environmental impact while maintaining the historical aesthetic we both loved. Our neighbors in Rosewood Hills included federal judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, and inherited wealth families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings throughout the region. But unlike many of our peers, Robert and I had remained connected to our working-class roots and the community that had nurtured our early success. We hosted the annual company picnic on our grounds, opened our gardens for charitable events, and maintained relationships with the contractors, gardeners, and service providers who kept our state beautiful. The wealth we had accumulated was substantial by any measure. Beyond the real estate, Grandview Manor, our original bakery building that we had converted into a museum and community center, a vacation home in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and investment properties in downtown Rosewood Hills, our portfolio included diversified investments that had grown to over $15 million, life insurance policies worth another $8 million, and my controlling stake in Whitmore Industries, which independent valuations placed at approximately $200 million. But the true measure of our success wasn't financial. It was the impact we had made on thousands of lives through our business practices, charitable giving, and commitment to ethical leadership. The Whitmore Foundation, established in 1998, had distributed over $25 million in scholarships, small business loans, and community development grants. Our employee profit-sharing program had created millionaires among workers who had started as entry-level bakers and grown with the company over decades. Marcus had grown up surrounded by this legacy of purposeful wealth. As a child, he had accompanied us to scholarship award ceremonies where we celebrated first-generation college students whose dreams we were helping to fulfill. He had worked alongside employees during summer jobs, learning not just our business operations, but the stories of families whose lives had been transformed by stable employment and generous benefits. During his teenage years, Marcus had seemed to embrace our values with genuine enthusiasm. He volunteered at community food banks, helped organize charity drives at his private school, and often told friends that he wanted to make a difference like mom and dad when he grew up. His high school graduation speech included a moving tribute to the example of service that Robert and I had provided, and his decision to study business at Stanford was motivated by his stated goal of learning to run a company that changes lives. I still have the letter he wrote during his freshman year, describing his excitement about courses in sustainable business practices and social entrepreneurship. He had written, "I'm learning so much about companies that prove you can do well by doing good. I can't wait to bring these ideas back to Whitmore Industries and help us become even bigger force for positive change." Those words, preserved in my library alongside hundreds of other family mementos, now felt like artifacts from a different person. Or perhaps evidence of how dramatically success and expectation could corrupt someone's character when they began to take their privileges for granted.
The change hadn't happened overnight. During Marcus's first year with the company after graduation, he had thrown himself into learning our operations with impressive dedication. He spent months in each department, working alongside employees who had known him since childhood, asking thoughtful questions about production processes, quality control systems, and the relationship building that had made our growth sustainable. His Stanford MBA had given him analytical tools that complemented our experiential knowledge, and, initially, his suggestions for operational improvements had been both insightful and respectful of our company culture. He proposed efficiency upgrades that would reduce waste without eliminating jobs, technology investments that would improve working conditions while increasing productivity,
and marketing strategies that would expand our reach while maintaining our artisanal brand identity. But somewhere during his second year, Marcus's focus had begun to shift from optimizing our existing success to maximizing what he saw as unrealized potential. He started attending industry conferences and networking events where he connected with other business school graduates who were transforming family enterprises through aggressive modernization strategies. The language he used in our monthly business reviews became increasingly focused on metrics like return on investment, market capitalization, and operational efficiency ratios, rather than the employee satisfaction, community impact, and customer loyalty measures that had always been our primary indicators of success. When I asked about these changes in perspective, Marcus would explain that he was bringing contemporary business analysis to bear on traditional operations, and that data-driven decision-making was essential for competing in modern markets. His social circle had also evolved in ways that concerned me. The college friends who visited during holidays were increasingly focused on investment banking, private equity, and corporate law, careers that emphasized financial returns over social impact. His girlfriend Sarah, whom I had grown to love like a daughter, was gradually replaced by a series of relationships with women who seemed more interested in his inheritance prospects than his character. Most troubling was Marcus's growing impatience with the time required to build consensus and maintain relationships within our company. Robert and I had always operated through collaborative leadership, involving department heads in major decisions and ensuring that changes were implemented gradually to maintain stability and employee morale. Marcus began criticizing this approach as inefficient and emotionally driven, rather than recognizing it as the foundation of our sustained success. During family dinners over the past year, Marcus had increasingly steered conversations toward his vision for unlocking Whitmore Industries' full potential through restructuring initiatives that would eliminate what he called legacy inefficiencies. When I pressed him for specifics, he would talk about consolidating facilities, automating production processes, and right-sizing our workforce to improve profit margins. The callousness with which he discussed laying off longtime employees was perhaps my first real indication that something fundamental had changed in his character. These weren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They were families I had celebrated with at company picnics, people whose children had grown up alongside Marcus, individuals whose loyalty and expertise had built the success he was so eager to optimize. But Marcus seemed to view these relationships as obstacles to efficiency, rather than assets to be treasured. When I mentioned specific employees who might be affected by his proposed changes, he would dismiss my concerns as personalizing business decisions that need to be based on objective criteria. The empathy that had once defined his character appeared to have been replaced by a cold calculation that reduced human beings to cost-benefit analyses. This transformation was particularly painful because it represented a betrayal of everything Robert and I had tried to teach through our example. We had never spoken about money as an end in itself, but rather as a tool for creating security, opportunity, and positive impact. Our wealth had always been accompanied by responsibility to our employees, our community, and future generations who would inherit both our assets and our obligations. I had spent considerable time and resources ensuring that Marcus understood these responsibilities. In addition to his business education, I had arranged for him to work with family wealth advisors who specialized in helping inheritors understand the complexities of managing large estates responsibly. He had attended conferences on philanthropic leadership and met with other business families who had successfully transitioned wealth across generations while maintaining their values. But somewhere in that education, Marcus seemed to have absorbed the mechanics of wealth management while losing sight of its moral dimensions. He could discuss trust structures and tax strategies with sophisticated understanding, but he appeared to have no emotional connection to the human impact of our family's resources. The estate planning documents that I had carefully crafted with our attorneys reflected my hope that Marcus would grow into the responsibilities of inheritance while providing safeguards against the destructive potential of sudden wealth. The trust structures were designed to provide financial security while encouraging continued involvement in our business and charitable activities.
Marcus was set to inherit the majority of our assets, including controlling interest in Whitmore Industries. But the inheritance was structured to reward demonstrated commitment to our family values. Annual distributions were tied to his active participation in company leadership and foundation activities, with larger payouts contingent on maintaining employment levels and charitable giving at or above current levels. I had also established what our attorneys called ethical guardrails, provisions that would transfer assets to charitable organizations if Marcus made decisions that violated our stated mission of operating a business that served multiple stakeholders rather than maximizing shareholder returns exclusively. These weren't intended as punitive measures, but as expressions of our belief that great wealth should serve great purposes. The legal documents filled 3 thick binders in my attorney's office, representing months of careful planning to ensure that our family's resources would continue creating positive impact long after Robert and I were gone. But all of those complex structures were built on the assumption that Marcus would embrace his inheritance as an opportunity to serve others, rather than simply an entitlement to personal luxury. As that Sunday evening approached, I had been looking forward to discussing these plans with Marcus in detail for the first time. Now that he had been with the company for 3 years and had experienced the satisfaction of contributing to our success, I felt he was ready to understand the full scope of his future responsibilities and the resources that would be available to fulfill them. I had prepared a presentation that outlined not just the financial assets he would inherit, but the legacy of relationships, community trust, and moral authority that represented the true wealth Robert and I had accumulated. I wanted him to understand that inheriting Whitmore Industries meant becoming a steward of 500 jobs, a guardian of our company's reputation for integrity, and a trustee of charitable resources that were already committed to ongoing projects that would benefit thousands of people over the coming decades. My hope was that this conversation would mark Marcus's transition from someone who worked in the family business to someone who truly understood his destiny as its next leader. I imagined his excitement as he grasped the full extent of the positive impact he could create, and his gratitude for the opportunity to build upon the foundation that Robert and I had spent our lives establishing. The dining room was prepared for what I expected to be one of the most important conversations in our family's history. The legal documents were organized in my library, ready to be reviewed. The financial statements and charitable reports were compiled to demonstrate the current scope of our giving and the growth potential for future impact. Even Duchess seemed to sense the significance of the evening, staying close to my side as I made final preparations and occasionally looking toward the front door as if she could anticipate Marcus's arrival. Her loyalty and intuitive understanding of my moods had become one of the greatest comforts in my life since Robert's death, and I often found myself talking to her about decisions and concerns that I had once shared with my husband. As 6 o'clock approached our traditional Sunday dinner time, I felt the same mixture of anticipation and pride that had always accompanied important family milestones. The table was set for celebration, the meal was prepared with love, and the future seemed full of possibilities for continued growth and positive impact. I had no idea that the next few hours would shatter every assumption I had made about Marcus's character, my success as a parent, and the security of the legacy that Robert and I had spent our lives building. The conversation that was about to unfold would force me to choose between unconditional family loyalty and the protection of values that meant more to me than blood relationships.
But first, Marcus had to arrive, and the words that would change everything had to be spoken. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything I believed about love, responsibility, and the true meaning of inheritance. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, and as I walked toward the front entrance with Duchess at my side, I still believed I was about to welcome my son home for a celebration of our family's bright future. Instead, I was about to meet a stranger who happened to share Marcus's face and discover that sometimes the greatest act of love requires the courage to let go of someone you thought you knew. Marcus arrived precisely on time, but everything about his appearance suggested this wouldn't be the warm family dinner I had envisioned. Gone was the casual elegance he usually wore to our Sunday gatherings. Instead, he stood at my front door wearing an expensive charcoal gray suit that looked more appropriate for a corporate boardroom than a family meal. His briefcase, an Italian leather piece I didn't recognize, suggested he had come prepared for business rather than bonding. "Hello, Mother," he said, leaning in for the perfunctory kiss on the cheek that had replaced his once genuine embraces. His cologne was different too, something sharp and modern that seemed designed to announce his presence rather than compliment it. Even his posture had changed. Gone was the relaxed confidence of someone comfortable in their family home, replaced by the rigid bearing of someone preparing for a negotiation. Duchess, usually excited to see Marcus, despite his recent coldness toward her, seemed to sense the tension immediately. Instead of her typical enthusiastic greeting, she remained by my side, her tail wagging uncertainly as she looked between us with the intuitive concern that had made her such a comforting presence since Robert's death.
"Marcus, darling," I said, trying to maintain the warmth that had always characterized our interactions. "You look so formal tonight. I hope you're hungry. I've prepared all your favorites." "Actually, Mother, I'm glad you mentioned favorites," he replied, following me toward the dining room with none of his usual appreciation for the seasonal decorations or the care I had put into preparing our home for his visit. "That's something we need to discuss tonight. It's time we had a serious conversation about priorities and resource allocation." The language stopped me cold. Resource allocation. These weren't words that belonged at a family dinner table, especially not when discussing favorites between a mother and son. But I pushed aside my unease, determined to give Marcus the benefit of the doubt and assume that his formal demeanor masked nervousness about the important conversation he had requested. The dining room, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight and filled with the aroma of his favorite meal, seemed to soften his edges slightly as we took our seats at opposite ends of the mahogany table. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to help me set this same table, carefully positioning the silverware and asking if he could light the candles when he was old enough to handle matches safely. "The salmon smells wonderful," he said, and I felt a flutter of hope that perhaps his businesslike arrival was simply nerves about whatever proposal he wanted to discuss. "You've always been an excellent cook, Mother. It's one of your many talents that shouldn't go unrecognized." The comment felt oddly formal, as if he were acknowledging a service provider rather than expressing affection for his mother, but I chose to focus on the appreciation rather than the tone. I served his plate with extra care, including the roasted vegetables I had grown in my own greenhouse and the wild rice pilaf that had been his special birthday request for over 2 decades. "So," I said as we began eating, "tell me about these important family matters you wanted to discuss. I've been looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the company's future and your vision for building on what your father and I started." Marcus set down his fork and reached for his briefcase, extracting a thick folder that he placed beside his plate with the gravity of someone presenting evidence in a courtroom. "Mother, what I want to discuss tonight is the need for a comprehensive restructuring of our family's financial arrangements and business operations. I've been analyzing our current situation, and frankly,
we're not maximizing the potential of our assets. The clinical language sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the November evening outside. This wasn't the conversation I had anticipated about shared values and continued legacy building. This sounded like a corporate takeover presentation. Marcus, when you say restructuring, what exactly are you proposing? He opened the folder to reveal charts, graphs, and financial projections that looked like they had been prepared by a consulting firm rather than created for a family discussion. I've been working with some colleagues from Stanford who specialize in family wealth optimization. They've identified several areas where we're leaving significant money on the table. Money on the table, I repeated, struggling to understand how our successful, profitable business could be characterized in terms of lost opportunities. For instance, Marcus pointed to a spreadsheet that reduced our 500 employees to rows of numbers. Our labor costs are 23% above industry standards. By right-sizing our workforce and implementing automation in our production facilities, we could improve profit margins by at least $12 million annually. The casual way he discussed eliminating jobs that supported families I had known for decades, made my stomach turn. Marcus, those aren't just labor costs you're talking about. Those are people who have built their lives around working for our company. Many of them have been with us for over 20 years. Mother, you can't run a modern business based on emotional attachments to legacy employees. These people are assets that need to generate returns commensurate with their costs. If they can't adapt to increased productivity requirements, then we need to replace them with resources that can. Resources. He was talking about human beings as if they were equipment to be upgraded or discarded based on efficiency calculations. The Marcus I raised would never have used such dehumanizing language about people who had contributed to our success for decades. What about their families? I asked, thinking of the Johnsons, whose 3 children had all graduated from college thanks to our educational benefits program. Or the Martinez family, whose son had just started working in our shipping department after completing his military service. What about their loyalty they've shown us through economic downturns and industry challenges? He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away an irrelevant concern. Loyalty doesn't appear on profit and loss statements, Mother. Sentiment doesn't create shareholder value. We need to make decisions based on objective financial analysis rather than subjective emotional considerations. The transformation in his vocabulary was as disturbing as the coldness in his tone. This was the language of business schools and consulting firms, not the heart-centered approach that had built our company's reputation and success. But more troubling was his apparent belief that financial returns were the only legitimate measure of business success.
Marcus, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my growing alarm, our company has been successful precisely because we've balanced financial performance with human considerations. Our employees are more productive and loyal because they know we care about them as people, not just as cost centers. That's an outdated management philosophy that worked in simpler times, he replied, flipping to another page of projections. Contemporary businesses succeed through operational excellence and strategic resource deployment, not through paternalistic employment policies that reduce competitive advantage. I watched my son deliver these corporate buzzwords with the confidence of someone who believed he had discovered profound truths that his naive parents had never understood. The boy who had once cried when we had to lay off 2 employees during the 2008 recession was now discussing mass layoffs as if they were inevitable steps in an optimization process. But that's not all, Marcus continued, warming to his presentation. We're also underutilizing our real estate assets. This house, for instance, represents approximately $4.5 million in equity that's generating 0 return on investment. We should consider selling Grandview Manor and moving you to a more appropriately sized property that better reflects efficient wealth management.
The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Grandview Manor wasn't just real estate. It was the culmination of Robert's and my dreams, the place where we had hosted countless celebrations and business meetings, the home where Marcus himself had been raised with love and values that had apparently failed to take root. "This is my home, Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your father and I built this place to reflect our values and provide a center for our family's activities. Every room holds memories of your childhood, of our growth as a family and as a business." "Memories don't generate income," Marcus replied, without a trace of sentimentality. "We could invest the proceeds from the sale in diversified portfolios that would yield 8 to 12% annually, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional revenue that's currently locked up in emotional real estate." Emotional real estate. He was describing the home where he had learned to ride a bicycle in the circular driveway, where he had built snow forts in the gardens, where he had graduated from high school in a party tent on the back lawn that had been filled with family, friends, and employees celebrating his achievements. But Marcus wasn't finished with his efficiency recommendations. "We also need to dramatically reduce our charitable giving," he continued, referring to another spreadsheet that quantified our foundation's impact in terms of lost investment opportunities. "Currently, we're donating approximately $2.3 million annually to various causes that provide no measurable return on investment. That money could be generating significant wealth accumulation instead of being given away to people who haven't earned it." People who haven't earned it. He was talking about scholarship recipients who were working multiple jobs while attending college, small business owners who were creating jobs in underserved communities, and community development projects that were revitalizing neighborhoods where families were building better lives for their children. "Marcus," I said, struggling to maintain composure, "those charitable activities aren't expensive. They're investments in human potential and community development. The scholarship recipients alone have generated over $150 million in increased lifetime earnings, creating taxpayers and community leaders who contribute far more than we've provided." "That's not how return on investment calculations work, Mother," he replied with the condescending tone of someone correcting a fundamental error. "We can't claim credit for other people's success or include hypothetical social benefits in our portfolio performance analysis. We need to focus on measurable financial returns to our family's wealth accumulation." The coldness in his voice when discussing the young people we had helped achieve their dreams was perhaps the most shocking aspect of his transformation. The Marcus I remembered had attended scholarship award ceremonies with genuine pride, often staying late to talk with recipients about their goals and challenges. Now he was reducing those relationships to failed investment strategies that needed to be eliminated for the sake of portfolio optimization. But the worst was yet to come. "Finally," Marcus said, reaching the climax of his presentation, "we need to discuss succession planning and decision-making authority. Mother, you're 70 years old, and frankly, your management approach reflects outdated values that are preventing us from maximizing our wealth potential. It's time to transition primary control of both the business and the foundation to leadership that understands contemporary financial strategies." The words landed like a declaration of war. He wasn't proposing gradual succession planning or collaborative leadership development. He was suggesting that I was too old and too sentimental to manage the wealth that Robert and I had spent my lives accumulating. "What exactly are you suggesting, Marcus?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand the true purpose of his formal presentation. "I'm suggesting that you step back from active management and allow me to implement the optimizations I've outlined," he said, his confidence apparently unshaken by the growing tension in my voice. "The changes I'm proposing could increase our family's net worth by 40 to 50% within 5 years, but only if we make decisions based on financial analysis rather than emotional attachments." The coldness in his voice when discussing the young people we had helped achieve their dreams was perhaps the most shocking aspect of his transformation.
The Marcus I remembered had attended scholarship award ceremonies with genuine pride, often staying late to talk with recipients about their goals and challenges. Now he was reducing those relationships to failed investment strategies that needed to be eliminated for the sake of portfolio optimization. But the worst was yet to come. Finally, Marcus said, reaching the climax of his presentation, we need to discuss succession planning and decision-making authority. Mother, you're 70 years old, and frankly, your management approach reflects outdated values that are preventing us from maximizing our wealth potential. It's time to transition primary control of both the business and the foundation to leadership that understands contemporary financial strategies. The words landed like a declaration of war. He wasn't proposing gradual succession planning or collaborative leadership development. He was suggesting that I was too old and too sentimental to manage the wealth that Robert and I had spent our lives accumulating. What exactly are you suggesting, Marcus? I asked, though I was beginning to understand the true purpose of his formal presentation. I'm suggesting that you step back from active management and allow me to implement the optimizations I've outlined, he said, his confidence apparently unshaken by the growing tension in my voice. The changes I'm proposing could increase our family's net worth by 40 to 50% within 5 years, but only if we make decisions based on financial analysis rather than emotional attachments.
The presumption was breathtaking. He had invited himself to Sunday dinner not to discuss his vision for our family's future, but to present a fait accompli that would eliminate everything Robert and I had valued about our success. He wanted to fire hundreds of employees, sell our family home, eliminate our charitable activities, and transfer control of our legacy to someone who viewed wealth as an end in itself rather than a tool for creating positive impact. Marcus, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me, what you're describing isn't optimization. It's the systematic destruction of everything your father and I built. You're talking about abandoning the values that made our success meaningful. Mother, he replied with a sigh that suggested he had expected this resistance, you're proving my point about emotional decision-making. What Dad built was impressive for his generation, but wealth accumulation strategies have evolved. We need to embrace modern approaches if we want to remain competitive. Competitive with whom? I asked. We're not competing with anyone. We're trying to build something that serves others while providing for our family's security. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps families from building generational wealth, Marcus said, his tone becoming more impatient. While you're focused on serving others, other family businesses are maximizing returns and creating lasting financial legacies. We could be worth $500 million within a decade if we're willing to make the necessary changes. $500 million. The number hung in the air like a poison gas, representing everything that had gone wrong with Marcus's understanding of success and purpose. He had become intoxicated by the possibility of accumulating vast wealth, apparently forgetting that money was supposed to serve life rather than become its primary objective. And what would we do with $500 million that we can't do with our current resources? I asked. Build an empire that lasts for generations, he replied immediately, his eyes lighting up with the fervor of someone describing a religious vision. Create a family office that manages investments across multiple sectors. Establish ourselves as a major force in regional development and political influence. Leave a legacy that makes the Whitmore name synonymous with financial success. Financial success. Not community impact, not ethical leadership, not the transformation of lives through opportunity and generosity, just the accumulation of money and the power that came with it. But I wasn't prepared for what he said next.
Mother, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a note of urgency that suggested he had been building toward this moment throughout the entire presentation. I need you to understand that these changes aren't optional anymore. Market conditions are evolving rapidly, and businesses that don't adapt quickly get left behind. We can't afford to wait for gradual transitions or consensus-building processes. What are you saying, Marcus? I'm saying that with or without your cooperation, these optimizations are going to happen, he replied, his mask of respectful consultation finally slipping to reveal the ultimatum underneath. I've already begun implementing some preliminary changes, and I'm prepared to accelerate the process if necessary. The threat was unmistakable. He was telling me that he intended to reshape our family's legacy according to his preferences, regardless of my wishes or input. But the most chilling aspect was his apparent belief that he had the right to make these decisions unilaterally. Marcus, I said slowly, you seem to have forgotten something important. I still own this company and control these assets. You don't have the authority to implement any changes without my approval. For the first time that evening, Marcus's confident facade cracked slightly, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Mother, he said, his voice dropping to a tone that I had never heard from him before. You need to be realistic about your situation. You're 70 years old. Your health could decline at any time. Your energy for managing complex business operations is already diminishing. The casual cruelty of reducing my age to a business liability was shocking enough, but Marcus wasn't finished. The truth is, he continued, leaning forward with the intensity of someone delivering a final argument, these assets are going to be mine eventually anyway. You'll be dead soon anyway. We can either manage this transition smoothly while you're still alive, or we can wait for natural processes to take their course and then implement necessary changes from a position of full authority. The words hit me like a slap across the face. You'll be dead soon anyway. My own son, the child I had carried for 9 months, nursed through countless illnesses, supported through every challenge and celebrated through every success, had just dismissed my life as a temporary inconvenience that was preventing him from accessing his inheritance. The dining room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of my grandmother's clock and the gentle sound of Duchess shifting position by the fireplace. The candles continued to flicker, casting dancing shadows across the table that had hosted so many joyful family celebrations. The aroma of the meal I had prepared with love still filled the air, but everything felt poisoned by the casual cruelty of Marcus's words. "You'll be dead soon anyway." As I sat there, staring at this stranger who wore my son's face, I realized that Marcus had revealed something far more devastating than his transformation from compassionate young man to ruthless wealth maximizer. He had shown me that in his mind, I had already ceased to exist as a person worthy of respect or consideration. I had become nothing more than an obstacle to his financial ambitions, a temporary impediment that time would eventually eliminate.
The boy I had raised with love and values had become a man who could casually discuss my death as a business opportunity. And in that moment, I understood that everything I had believed about family loyalty, unconditional love, and the power of good parenting to shape character had been naive illusions. Marcus was looking at me expectantly, apparently waiting for me to acknowledge the logic of his position and agree to his restructuring demands. He seemed genuinely surprised by my silence, as if he couldn't understand why anyone would find his approach objectionable. But what he didn't realize was that his words had just triggered a transformation in me that was far more profound than his evolution from compassion to callousness. In dismissing my life as a temporary inconvenience, he had freed me from the constraints of maternal loyalty that had prevented me from seeing his character clearly. "You'll be dead soon anyway." Well, Marcus, I thought, as I looked across the table at this person I no longer recognized, let's see how quickly soon can arrive for your inheritance plans. The battle for our family's legacy was about to begin,
And Marcus had just provided me with the perfect weapon to use against him, his own words, spoken with such casual cruelty that they revealed everything I needed to know about the man he had become. But first, I needed to hear him say it again, just to make absolutely certain that I had understood him correctly. Because what I was about to do would change both of our lives forever, and I wanted to be completely sure that such drastic action was justified. "I'm sorry, Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Could you repeat what you just said about my age and your inheritance timeline?" And with a confidence that would soon prove to be his undoing, Marcus repeated the words that would cost him everything. "You'll be dead soon anyway, Mother. We need to plan accordingly." The silence that followed Marcus's repeated declaration stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. As I sat there processing the casual cruelty of his words, I watched him check his expensive watch, a Rolex I didn't remember him owning, and shuffle his presentation materials with the impatient air of someone waiting for a business meeting to conclude so he could move on to more important matters. "Mother," he said finally, apparently interpreting my stunned silence as capitulation, "I'm glad we've had this conversation. I know change can be difficult, but you'll see that these optimizations will secure our family's financial future for generations to come." He was already reaching for his briefcase, preparing to leave as if we had just concluded a successful negotiation, rather than a conversation where he had essentially wished for my death. The assumption that I would simply accept his restructuring demands because resistance seemed futile revealed an arrogance that took my breath away. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think there are some things we need to clarify before you leave." Something in my tone must have alerted him that the conversation wasn't over, because he settled back in his chair with barely concealed irritation. "Of course, Mother. What clarifications do you need?" "I need to understand exactly what you've already implemented without my knowledge or approval," I said, remembering his casual mention of preliminary changes that were already underway. "You said you'd begun some optimizations. What specifically have you done?" For the first time that evening, Marcus looked uncomfortable, his confident facade flickering as he realized he might have revealed more than he intended. "Well, nothing major," he said, his voice losing some of its authoritative edge. "Just some efficiency improvements that any responsible manager would implement." The evasiveness in his response confirmed my suspicion that there was much more to discover about Marcus's unauthorized activities. "I'd like specifics," I pressed. "What efficiency improvements? Implemented when? And affecting whom?" Marcus glanced at his watch again, a gesture that had become his default response whenever conversations moved in directions he hadn't scripted. "Mother, we don't need to get bogged down in operational details tonight. The important thing is that we're aligned on the strategic vision for moving forward." But I wasn't about to let him deflect. "Marcus, if you've made changes to our company operations without my knowledge, I need to understand what those changes are. I'm still the owner of this business, regardless of your timeline from my demise." The sharp edge in my voice seemed to surprise him, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty cross his face. Throughout our entire relationship, I had been the accommodating mother who supported his decisions and deferred to his judgment on matters he claimed to understand better than I did. This was perhaps the first time I had challenged him directly with unmistakable authority. "Fine," he said, opening his folder again with obvious reluctance. "I've streamlined some of our more inefficient processes, reduced redundancies in staffing, eliminated some legacy positions that weren't generating adequate returns." The euphemisms were chilling in their calculated vagueness. "How many people have you fired, Marcus?" "I wouldn't characterize them as firings," he replied, following back on corporate speak. "These were strategic workforce optimizations designed to improve productivity ratios." How many, Marcus? The boy I had raised with love and values had become a man who could casually discuss my death as a business opportunity. And in that moment, I understood that everything I had believed about family loyalty, unconditional love,
and the power of good parenting to shape character had been naive illusions. Marcus was looking at me expectantly, apparently waiting for me to acknowledge the logic of his position and agree to his restructuring demands. He seemed genuinely surprised by my silence, as if he couldn't understand why anyone would find his approach objectionable. But what he didn't realize was that his words had just triggered a transformation in me that was far more profound than his evolution from compassion to callousness. In dismissing my life as a temporary inconvenience, he had freed me from the constraints of maternal loyalty that had prevented me from seeing his character clearly. "You'll be dead soon anyway." Well, Marcus, I thought, as I looked across the table at this person I no longer recognized, let's see how quickly soon can arrive for your inheritance plans. The battle for our family's legacy was about to begin, and Marcus had just provided me with the perfect weapon to use against him, his own words, spoken with such casual cruelty that they revealed everything I needed to know about the man he had become. But first, I needed to hear him say it again, just to make absolutely certain that I had understood him correctly. Because what I was about to do would change both of our lives forever, and I wanted to be completely sure that such drastic action was justified. "I'm sorry, Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Could you repeat what you just said about my age and your inheritance timeline?" And with a confidence that would soon prove to be his undoing, Marcus repeated the words that would cost him everything. "You'll be dead soon anyway, Mother. We need to plan accordingly." The silence that followed Marcus's repeated declaration stretched between us like a chasm that could never be bridged. As I sat there processing the casual cruelty of his words, I watched him check his expensive watch, a Rolex I didn't remember him owning, and shuffle his presentation materials with the impatient air of someone waiting for a business meeting to conclude so he could move on to more important matters. "Mother," he said finally, apparently interpreting my stunned silence as capitulation, "I'm glad we've had this conversation. I know change can be difficult, but you'll see that these optimizations will secure our family's financial future for generations to come." He was already reaching for his briefcase, preparing to leave as if we had just concluded a successful negotiation, rather than a conversation where he had essentially wished for my death. The assumption that I would simply accept his restructuring demands because resistance seemed futile revealed an arrogance that took my breath away. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think there are some things we need to clarify before you leave." Something in my tone must have alerted him that the conversation wasn't over, because he settled back in his chair with barely concealed irritation. "Of course, Mother. What clarifications do you need?" "I need to understand exactly what you've already implemented without my knowledge or approval," I said, remembering his casual mention of preliminary changes that were already underway. "You said you'd begun some optimizations. What specifically have you done?" For the first time that evening, Marcus looked uncomfortable, his confident facade flickering as he realized he might have revealed more than he intended. "Well, nothing major," he said, his voice losing some of its authoritative edge. "Just some efficiency improvements that any responsible manager would implement." The evasiveness in his response confirmed my suspicion that there was much more to discover about Marcus's unauthorized activities. "I'd like specifics," I pressed. "What efficiency improvements? Implemented when? And affecting whom?" Marcus glanced at his watch again, a gesture that had become his default response whenever conversations moved in directions he hadn't scripted. "Mother, we don't need to get bogged down in operational details tonight. The important thing is that we're aligned on the strategic vision for moving forward." But I wasn't about to let him deflect. "Marcus, if you've made changes to our company operations without my knowledge, I need to understand what those changes are. I'm still the owner of this business, regardless of your timeline from my demise." The sharp edge in my voice seemed to surprise him, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty cross his face. Throughout our entire relationship,
I had been the accommodating mother who supported his decisions and deferred to his judgment on matters he claimed to understand better than I did. This was perhaps the first time I had challenged him directly with unmistakable authority. "Fine," he said, opening his folder again with obvious reluctance. "I've streamlined some of our more inefficient processes, reduced redundancies in staffing, eliminated some legacy positions that weren't generating adequate returns." The euphemisms were chilling in their calculated vagueness. "How many people have you fired, Marcus?" "I wouldn't characterize them as firings," he replied, following back on corporate speak. "These were strategic workforce optimizations designed to improve productivity ratios." "How many, Marcus?"
The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. 17 employees were transitioned to other opportunities over the past 6 months, he admitted, his voice taking on a defensive tone. But these were positions that data analysis showed were no longer essential to our core operations. 17 families, 17 people who had trusted our company with their livelihoods, who had built their lives around stable employment with Whitmore Industries, who had been transitioned to other opportunities without my knowledge or consent. The casual way Marcus discussed these devastating impacts on real people's lives made my stomach turn. "Who specifically was fired?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand the full scope of his unauthorized actions. Marcus consulted a document from his briefcase, reading names like items from a grocery list. Harold Chen from maintenance, his position was eliminated through automated systems upgrades. Betty Rodriguez from quality control, her functions were consolidated with other departments. Michael O'Brien from shipping, we've outsourced those responsibilities to more cost-effective contractors. Each name hit me like a physical blow. Harold Chen, whose daughter had just started her sophomore year at nursing school on one of our scholarships. Betty Rodriguez, whose husband had been battling cancer and whose insurance through our generous benefits program was covering experimental treatments. Michael O'Brien, a veteran who had joined us 3 years ago when he was struggling to find employment after his military service. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely controlled, "these aren't just positions that were eliminated. These are people with families, mortgages, medical expenses. Harold's been with us for 8 years. Betty's husband is fighting for his life. Michael has 3 young children." "Mother," Marcus replied, with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious concepts to a slow student, "you're doing exactly what I warned about, making business decisions based on emotional attachments rather than objective analysis. These employees were underperforming relative to their compensation costs." "Underperforming?" I repeated incredulously. "Harold has never missed a day of work and has prevented thousands of dollars in equipment failures through his preventative maintenance programs. Betty's quality control protocols have maintained our reputation for excellence throughout our entire growth period. Michael's shipping efficiency improvements have reduced our delivery costs by 12%. Those are anecdotal achievements that don't offset their total compensation costs," Marcus countered, apparently unmoved by my defense of these loyal employees. "Contemporary businesses can't afford to maintain legacy staff for sentimental reasons." The transformation in Marcus's language and thinking was so complete that I wondered if I was speaking to the same person I had raised. The boy who had once helped me deliver Christmas bonuses personally to employees' homes, who had remembered their children's names and asked about their families, had become someone who reduced human beings to compensation cost calculations. "What about their severance packages?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "We provided the minimum required by law," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "Extended benefits packages weren't financially justified for positions that were being eliminated for performance reasons." Minimum severance for people who had given years of loyal service to our company, who had contributed to our success and trusted us to provide security for their families. Marcus had cut them loose with bare minimum compensation while implementing optimizations that would save the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. "Did you discuss these terminations with anyone before implementing them?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that Marcus had been operating as a shadow CEO without oversight or accountability. "I consulted with the management consulting firm that helped me develop the optimization strategy," he said.
They confirmed that these workforce adjustments were standard practices for companies serious about maximizing shareholder value. Management consulting firm. Marcus had been paying outside consultants to analyze our family business and recommend changes that eliminated employees I had known for years. The betrayal was systematic and calculating, not the result of poor judgment, but of deliberate planning to reshape our company according to his vision of efficiency. What consulting firm? I demanded. Sterling Strategic Solutions, Marcus replied, naming a company I had never heard of. They specialize in family business transformation and wealth optimization. Their analysis identified significant opportunities for improvement in our operational efficiency. I made a mental note to research Sterling Strategic Solutions and understand exactly what advice they had been providing to my son. But more immediately, I needed to understand the full scope of changes Marcus had implemented without authorization. What else? I asked. What other optimizations have you made? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, apparently realizing that his disclosure of the employee terminations had opened a door he couldn't close. I've also renegotiated some of our supplier contracts to more competitive terms, he admitted. Which suppliers? Several of the local farmers who provide ingredients for our artisanal lines, he said. Their pricing was significantly above market rates for comparable products.
The local farmers who had been our partners since the early days, whose commitment to organic practices and sustainable agriculture had been essential to our premium product positioning. These weren't just suppliers. They were relationships that Robert and I had cultivated for decades, partnerships that supported rural families while ensuring the quality ingredients that distinguished our products from mass-produced alternatives. Marcus, those farmers aren't just suppliers charging premium prices, I said, struggling to control my growing anger. They're partners who provide specialty ingredients that are essential to our brand identity. Our customers pay premium prices because they know our products are made with locally sourced, sustainably grown ingredients from farmers we've worked with for years. That's emotionally appealing marketing language, Marcus replied dismissively. But the reality is that equivalent ingredients are available at much lower costs from commercial suppliers. Our profit margins on those product lines have improved by 18% since I implemented the changes. Equivalent ingredients. He had destroyed decades-old partnerships with local farming families and replaced their carefully cultivated specialty products with mass-produced alternatives, all to improve profit margins on products whose entire value proposition was based on the quality and provenance of their ingredients. What did our customers think about the ingredient changes? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. We haven't received any significant complaints, Marcus said, which I suspected meant he had been careful not to announce the changes or seek feedback that might interfere with his cost-cutting initiatives. But I wasn't done discovering the scope of his unauthorized actions. What other contracts have you renegotiated? Marcus's discomfort was becoming more apparent as he realized the conversation was moving far beyond the strategic overview he had planned to present. I've also updated our charitable giving commitments to more sustainable levels, he admitted. What does that mean? I've terminated several ongoing funding commitments that weren't generating measurable returns, he said, falling back on the corporate language that had become his default mode of communication. The scholarship program, the small business loan fund, and the community development initiatives were consuming resources that could be better allocated to wealth accumulation strategies. The words hit me like a series of physical blows. Marcus had unilaterally destroyed the charitable programs that had been the heart of our family's commitment to serving others. Dozens of students who were depending on continued scholarship support for their education. Small business owners who had received loans and were making payments that had been scheduled to fund future entrepreneurs. Community development projects that were in various stages of completion. Marcus, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Those weren't just charitable commitments, they were legal obligations to people who had organized their lives around our support. Students who are depending on scholarship renewals to complete their degrees. Business owners who have loan agreements that guaranteed reinvestment of their payments into new ventures. I've reviewed the legal documents with our attorneys, Marcus replied, with the confidence of someone who had planned for this objection. Most of these commitments included termination clauses that allowed for discontinuation based on changed financial circumstances. The few remaining obligations have been transferred to other charitable organizations. He had consulted attorneys about breaking our promises to scholarship recipients and small business borrowers. The level of premeditation required to research legal escape routes from our charitable commitments while maintaining plausible deniability revealed a calculating cruelty that took my breath away. What attorneys? I demanded. We've used the same legal firm for 20 years, and they would never have advised breaking commitments to students and community development projects. I engaged a new firm that specializes in wealth preservation and asset protection, Marcus admitted, Morrison, Blake & Associates. They have extensive experience helping families optimize their philanthropic strategies for maximum tax efficiency. Another consultant, another professional relationship that I knew nothing about. Marcus had been building a shadow infrastructure of advisors and service providers to support his transformation of our family legacy without my knowledge or involvement. The scope of his unauthorized actions was staggering. Employee terminations, supplier changes, charitable commitment cancellations, new legal advisors, management consultants. Marcus had been systematically dismantling everything Robert and I had built while presenting himself as a loyal employee working for the family business. But there was one more question I needed answered. Marcus, how have you been paying for all these consultants and new service providers? These firms don't work for free, and I haven't seen invoices for management consulting or new legal services. For the first time that evening, Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable, his confident demeanor cracking as he realized he had walked into territory that would be difficult to navigate. I've been using discretionary business development funds, he said, his voice losing the authoritative tone that had characterized most of his responses. We don't have discretionary business development funds, I replied immediately. Every significant expense requires approval from either me or our CFO, and I haven't approved any payments to Sterling Strategic Solutions or Morrison, Blake & Associates. Well, Marcus said, shifting in his chair and avoiding direct eye contact for the first time that evening, I may have used some creative accounting approaches to categorize these expenses appropriately. Creative accounting approaches? The euphemism was so transparent that I almost laughed despite my anger. Marcus, what you're describing sounds like financial fraud. How exactly did you pay for these services without proper authorization? Mother, you're being overly dramatic, he replied, but the confidence was gone from his voice. These were legitimate business expenses that will generate returns far exceeding their costs. I simply allocated them to existing budget categories that had sufficient flexibility to accommodate the charges. Which budget categories? Various operational accounts that had surplus balances, he said evasively. Marcus, I want specifics. Which accounts, what amounts, and what authorization did you use to access those funds? The interrogation was clearly making him uncomfortable, but I was determined to understand the full extent of his deception. If Marcus had been accessing company funds without authorization to pay for consultants who were helping him dismantle our business and charitable activities, then his betrayal was even more serious than I had initially understood. Look, Mother, Marcus said, standing up abruptly and gathering his materials. I think we've covered enough detail for tonight. The important thing is that these changes are already showing positive results, and we can build on that progress moving forward. But I wasn't about to let him leave without answers. Marcus, sit down. We're not finished with this conversation. Something in my voice, perhaps the steel that had helped me build a successful business over 4 decades, made him hesitate. For a moment, he looked like the uncertain child who used to seek my approval before making important decisions. But then the corporate mask slipped back into place. Actually, Mother, I think we are finished for tonight, he said, his voice taking on a cold edge. I've presented my analysis and recommendations. You can take some time to process the information, and we can discuss implementation details at our next meeting. There won't be a next meeting until you answer my questions about how you've been financing these consultants, I said firmly. Marcus paused at the dining room doorway,
turning back with an expression that was equal parts irritation and calculation. "Mother, I understand that change can be overwhelming at your age, but the reality is that these optimizations are going to continue with or without your involvement. I'm being respectful by including you in the planning process, but your cooperation isn't actually required for implementation." The threat was unmistakable. Marcus was telling me that he intended to continue his unauthorized transformation of our business regardless of my objections. But more chilling was the casual way he had dismissed my concerns as the confused reactions of someone too old to understand modern business practices. "We'll see about that," I said quietly. "Yes, Mother, we will. Enjoy the rest of your evening." And with that, he walked out of my home, leaving behind the remnants of our family dinner and the wreckage of everything I had believed about our relationship. The front door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty rooms, like a period at the end of a sentence. I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the elegant place settings that had been prepared with love for what I had expected to be a celebration of our family's future. The candles continued to burn, casting dancing shadows across the table that now felt like a crime scene where my illusions about Marcus had been systematically murdered. Duchess approached cautiously, sensing my distress and offering the wordless comfort that had become so precious since Robert's death. Her warm presence against my legs reminded me that loyalty and unconditional love still existed in the world, even if they no longer characterized the relationship with my son. As I sat there processing everything Marcus had revealed, I realized that his casual cruelty during dinner had actually been a gift. By showing me his true character so clearly, he had freed me from the parental loyalty that had prevented me from seeing his actions objectively. The Marcus who wished for my death was also the Marcus who had fired 17 loyal employees, broken promises to scholarship recipients, destroyed partnerships with local farmers, and apparently embezzled company funds to pay consultants who were helping him dismantle our family legacy. But what Marcus didn't understand was that his confident assumption about my powerlessness was based on a fundamental miscalculation. I might be 70 years old, but I was far from helpless. I had built a successful business through careful planning, strategic thinking, and the ability to make difficult decisions when circumstances required them. And Marcus had just provided me with all the motivation I needed to use those skills against him. The investigation that would determine the fate of our family legacy was about to begin, and Marcus had no idea that his own words had just transformed his loving mother into his most dangerous opponent.
The silence that filled Grandview Manor after Marcus's departure was unlike any I had ever experienced. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of evenings settling over my home. It was the hollow stillness that follows devastation, when familiar spaces become alien landscapes marked by the wreckage of destroyed relationships and shattered assumptions. I remained seated at my dining table for nearly an hour, Duchess faithfully by my side, as my mind processed the full implications of what had just transpired. The man who had walked out of my home wasn't just a son who had disappointed me. He was a stranger who had systematically betrayed everything Robert and I had built while planning to profit from my death. But as the initial shock began to fade, it was replaced by something far more powerful and focused, a cold, calculating anger that reminded me exactly why I had succeeded in business for over 4 decades. Marcus had made the fundamental error of assuming that his 70-year-old mother would be too weak, too sentimental, or too naive to fight back against his corporate takeover of our family legacy. He was about to discover just how wrong that assumption was. The first step was documentation. I moved to Robert's library, where decades of business records provided a template for the systematic approach I would need to dismantle Marcus's unauthorized empire. If he had been operating through creative accounting and shadow consulting relationships, then those activities had left paper trails that could be uncovered by someone who understood how to look for them. I began with our company's financial records, which I accessed through the secure login that Marcus apparently didn't realize I still monitored regularly. His confidence in my technological limitations was another miscalculation that would work to my advantage.
The first anomaly I discovered was a series of payments to Sterling Strategic Solutions totaling $127,000 over 6 months. The expenses had been categorized under professional development and operational consulting, buried within legitimate training and advisory costs that wouldn't normally trigger scrutiny. Marcus had been clever about hiding the payments, but not clever enough to realize that I regularly review all professional service expenses above $5,000. The invoices from Sterling Strategic Solutions made for chilling reading. They outlined a comprehensive family business optimization strategy that included detailed recommendations for workforce reduction, asset reallocation, charitable commitment termination, and succession planning acceleration. The final item was particularly disturbing. It referred to strategies for managing resistant legacy leadership during transition periods. Managing resistant legacy leadership. They had been planning approaches to neutralize my objections to their restructuring recommendations. The consulting firm wasn't just providing business analysis, they were developing strategies to marginalize me within my own company. But Sterling Strategic Solutions was only part of Marcus's shadow infrastructure. The legal bills from Morrison Blake and Associates revealed an even more disturbing pattern of planning. Over $89,000 had been spent on research into trust structures, inheritance law, and what their invoices euphemistically called expedited succession scenarios. The legal memoranda made my blood run cold. Morrison Blake and Associates had been researching grounds for having me declared mentally incompetent, strategies for challenging my control of company assets, and methods for accelerating inheritance transfers in cases where elderly business owners were deemed unable to make rational decisions regarding complex financial matters. Marcus hadn't just been planning to wait for my natural death, he had been exploring legal mechanisms to have me removed from control of my own assets while I was still alive. The casual cruelty of his "you'll be dead soon anyway" now took on an even more sinister dimension. If natural processes didn't move quickly enough for his timeline, he apparently had backup plans. But the most devastating discovery was hidden within payroll records. The 17 employees Marcus had terminated weren't random selections based on performance analysis. They were strategic eliminations of people who had personal relationships with me and might have reported his activities. Harold Chen, Betty Rodriguez, Michael O'Brien, and the others weren't fired for efficiency reasons. They were eliminated because their loyalty to our family values made them potential obstacles to his transformation agenda. Each termination had been carefully planned to remove witnesses to his unauthorized changes while maintaining plausible deniability about his motivations. The consulting firm's recommendations included detailed profiles of each employee, noting their resistance potential and reporting likelihood alongside their productivity metrics. As I compiled this evidence, I realized that Marcus's betrayal was far more systematic and calculating than I had initially understood. This wasn't impulsive greed or momentary poor judgment. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign to steal control of our family legacy while I was still alive to see it destroyed. But Marcus had made one critical error in his planning. He had underestimated the woman who had built the empire he was trying to steal. My second step was to secure legal protection for our assets and operations. At 6 a.m. Monday morning, I called my longtime attorney, Margaret Thornfield, who had handled our family's legal affairs for over 20 years. Margaret had been Robert's law school classmate and had guided us through every major business decision, from our first expansion to the complex trust structures that governed our charitable foundation.
Eleanor, Margaret said after I explained the situation, this is one of the most calculated cases of financial elder abuse I've encountered in 30 years of practice. Marcus hasn't just breached his fiduciary duties, he's committed multiple felonies, including embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to deprive you of your property rights. What are my options? I asked. Immediate and comprehensive, Margaret replied. We can freeze all company accounts to prevent further unauthorized transactions, file criminal charges for the money he's already stolen, seek restraining orders to prevent him from accessing company property or contacting employees, and initiate proceedings to recover every dollar he spent on unauthorized consultants.
But I wasn't interested in simply stopping Marcus's current activities. I wanted to ensure that he could never again threaten the legacy that Robert and I had built together. Margaret, I said, I want to revise my estate planning documents completely. I want to ensure that Marcus never inherits a single dollar of our family's wealth. Eleanor, that's certainly your right, Margaret replied carefully. But are you sure you want to make such a dramatic change based on one evening's conversation? Family relationships can be repaired, but disinheritance is typically irreversible. Margaret, this wasn't one evening's conversation, I explained. This was the revelation of a systematic campaign that's been underway for months. Marcus has been stealing from our company, destroying our charitable commitments, and planning legal strategies to have me declared incompetent so he can accelerate his access to his inheritance. The silence on Margaret's end told me she was processing the full implications of what I had discovered. In that case, she said finally, we need to move very quickly and very carefully. If Marcus has been consulting attorneys about challenging your competency, we need to establish clear documentation of your mental acuity and decision-making capacity before implementing any changes. Over the next 3 days, Margaret and I worked with a team of specialists to create an ironclad estate plan that would protect our family's wealth from Marcus's predatory ambitions. The new documents included comprehensive psychological evaluations confirming my mental competency, detailed documentation of Marcus's unauthorized activities, and a revised inheritance structure that would ensure our resources continued serving the community values that Robert and I had always prioritized. But the most important element of the new plan was also the most symbolic: the designation of Duchess as the primary beneficiary of my personal estate. Eleanor, I understand your anger, and I support your right to disinherit Marcus based on his behavior. But are you sure you want to make your dog the beneficiary? There are other options that might serve your values while also making a stronger legal statement. Margaret, I replied, Duchess has shown me more loyalty and genuine affection in 3 years than Marcus has demonstrated in the past 2 years. She has never lied to me, never stolen from me, never wished for my death so she could access my resources. If I'm going to leave my personal wealth to someone who actually cares about my well-being, Duchess is a much better choice than Marcus. The legal structure we created was both practical and poetic. Duchess would inherit my personal estate, including Grandview Manor, my investment portfolio, and my life insurance proceeds, with the assets held in a trust managed by the local animal welfare organization that had originally rescued her. The trust would provide for Duchess's care while using the remaining funds to support animal rescue efforts and veterinary care for pets belonging to low-income families. My controlling interest in Whitmore Industries would transfer to a charitable foundation dedicated to continuing our scholarship programs, small business lending, and community development initiatives. The foundation's board would include longtime employees, community leaders, and representatives from organizations that had benefited from our charitable giving over the decades. Marcus would inherit nothing, except a detailed letter explaining exactly why his behavior had cost him his birthright. But before implementing these changes, I wanted to give Marcus one final opportunity to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. I called him and requested a meeting at our company offices, neutral ground, where our conversation would be recorded for legal purposes and where his responses could be witnessed by others. "Mother," Marcus said when he arrived at our offices that Thursday afternoon, "I'm glad you called. I was hoping you'd had time to process my recommendations and recognize the wisdom of moving forward with the optimization plan." He still believed he was in control of the situation. His confidence was so complete that he seemed genuinely surprised when Margaret Thornfield and 2 other attorneys entered the conference room along with a court stenographer and recording equipment. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, his casual demeanor flickering as he realized this wasn't the capitulation meeting he had expected. "Marcus," I said, opening the thick folder of evidence that Margaret and I had prepared, "this is a final opportunity for you to explain your unauthorized activities and perhaps demonstrate some genuine remorse for the damage you've caused to our family and our business."
The next hour was one of the most painful experiences of my life. As Margaret and I presented the evidence of Marcus's systematic betrayal, the embezzled funds, the broken charitable commitments, the fired employees, the legal research into having me declared incompetent, I watched my son's face cycle through shock, denial, anger, and finally a cold calculation that confirmed everything I had learned about his character. "You can't prove any malicious intent," he said when confronted with the evidence. "Everything I did was within my authority as a company officer and was designed to improve our financial position. If you didn't approve of my management decisions, you should have been more involved in day-to-day operations." Even faced with overwhelming evidence of his wrongdoing, Marcus was still trying to shift blame and avoid accountability. The 17 families whose lives he had disrupted, the students whose educations he had jeopardized, the farmers whose partnerships he had destroyed, none of it mattered to him because he viewed these impacts as acceptable costs of his optimization strategy. But it was his response to the question of his inheritance that revealed the final truth about who he had become. "Marcus," Margaret asked, "are you prepared to make restitution for the unauthorized funds you've spent and commit to reversing the policy changes you've implemented without proper authority?" "Absolutely not," Marcus replied without hesitation. "I'm not going to apologize for making decisions that have improved our company's financial performance, and I'm certainly not going to reverse efficiency improvements just because they make some people uncomfortable." "Even if those decisions cost you your inheritance?" Margaret pressed. Marcus laughed, actually laughed, as if the suggestion was absurd. "Mother isn't going to disinherit her only child over a few management decisions. She needs me to carry on the family legacy. She needs me to inherit the business and continue building wealth for future generations." The arrogance was breathtaking. Even after being confronted with evidence of systematic fraud and betrayal, Marcus still believed he was entitled to inherit our family's wealth simply by virtue of being my biological child. He showed no understanding that inheritance is earned through character and values, not claimed through genetic relationships. "Marcus," I said quietly, "you're wrong about what I need. What I need is to ensure that the wealth your father and I created continues serving others rather than enabling someone who sees other people as obstacles to profit maximization." I slid the revised estate planning documents across the conference table. "These are the new inheritance provisions that will take effect immediately. I've disinherited you completely and transferred your designated assets to beneficiaries who will use them to continue the charitable work you tried to destroy." Marcus read through the documents with growing disbelief, his confident facade cracking as he realized the full implications of what I had done. "Mother, you can't be serious. You're giving my inheritance to your dog?" "I'm giving your inheritance to a living being who has shown me genuine love and loyalty," I corrected. "Duchess has never lied to me, never stolen from me, and never wished for my death so she could access my resources. She's proven herself far more worthy of trust and care than you have." The silence that followed was profound. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Marcus was confronted with consequences that he couldn't manipulate, negotiate, or rationalize away. The casual cruelty that had characterized his treatment of employees, charitable recipients, and his own mother had finally caught up with him in a way that would permanently alter his life. "You'll regret this," he said finally, his voice taking on the threatening tone I had heard at our Sunday dinner. "I have legal options. I have documentation of your erratic behavior. I can challenge this disinheritance on grounds of mental incompetence or undue influence." "Actually, you can't," Margaret interjected smoothly. "We've anticipated those challenges and documented Eleanor's complete mental competency through multiple independent evaluations. We've also compiled comprehensive evidence of your unauthorized activities, which would make any legal challenge extremely difficult for you to pursue without risking criminal prosecution."
The look on Marcus's face as he realized his legal options had been eliminated was almost pitiable. For the first time, he seemed to understand that actions have consequences, and that his corporate optimization strategies couldn't protect him from the moral implications of his choices. "This is insane," he said, standing up abruptly. "You're destroying our family over business disagreements. You're choosing your dog over your son." "No, Marcus," I replied sadly. "You destroyed our family when you chose money over people, profit over principles, and your own greed over the values we tried to teach you. I'm simply ensuring that your choices don't also destroy the legacy of service that your father and I built together." Marcus left our offices that afternoon, knowing that his comfortable assumptions about inheritance wealth and family obligation had been permanently shattered. The boy who had grown up expecting to inherit millions became a man whose character flaws had cost him everything. But the story doesn't end with Marcus's disinheritance. It ends with the flourishing of the values that Robert and I had always prioritized.
6 months later, Duchess and I were featured in the regional newspaper's annual philanthropy issue, highlighting the innovative trust structure that was providing both animal welfare services and continuing our family's tradition of community support. The article included photographs of Duchess at the animal shelter, surrounded by volunteers whose work was being funded by her inheritance trust. The Whitmore Foundation, now managed independently of Marcus's influence, had restored all the scholarship programs he had terminated and expanded them to serve twice as many students as before. The small business lending program was funding new entrepreneurs who were creating jobs in underserved communities. The community development initiatives were breaking ground on affordable housing projects that would benefit hundreds of families. Meanwhile, Marcus was facing both criminal charges for embezzlement and civil lawsuits from the employees he had wrongfully terminated. Sterling Strategic Solutions and Morrison Blake and Associates were under investigation for their roles in facilitating elder financial abuse. The house of cards that Marcus had built through deception and manipulation was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. But perhaps most satisfying was the response from our community. The story of how Duchess had inherited millions because she had shown more character than my human son resonated with people who understood that loyalty and love are more valuable than biological relationships or corporate efficiency. Letters poured in from scholarship recipients whose educations had been saved, from employees who had been rehired with back pay and benefits, from community organizations whose projects were moving forward again. These weren't just grateful acknowledgments, they were celebrations of the principle that wealth should serve moral purposes rather than simply accumulate for its own sake. As I sit here today in my library with Duchess sleeping contentedly at my feet and the winter sun streaming through windows that overlook gardens that will soon be filled with spring flowers, I have no regrets about the choices I made. Marcus's cruel words about my approaching death had freed me from the constraints of unconditional family loyalty and allowed me to see clearly what needed to be done. The empire that Robert and I built continues to serve others, guided by the values we always believed were more important than profit margins or efficiency ratios. The scholarships, the small business loans, the community development projects, all of it continues because I chose to protect those programs from someone who would have destroyed them in pursuit of personal wealth accumulation. And Duchess, the golden retriever who showed more character than my son, has become a symbol of the truth that love and loyalty can't be bought, inherited, or optimized. They can only be earned through consistent demonstration of care for others. Marcus was right about one thing. I will be dead soon anyway, at least in historical terms. But when that day comes, I'll know that the wealth Robert and I accumulated is continuing to create opportunities for others, rather than enabling the selfish ambitions of someone who confused entitlement with inheritance. The greatest gift I gave Marcus wasn't the expensive education, the business opportunities, or even the love that shaped his childhood. It was teaching him that actions have consequences and that character matters more than genetic relationships. He may never appreciate that lesson, but it was the most important inheritance I could provide. And the greatest gift I gave myself was the courage to choose values over blood, principles over sentiment, and the future welfare of hundreds of people over the comfort of enabling one person's destructive behavior.
Sometimes love requires the strength to let go of someone who has chosen a path that makes continued relationship impossible. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is ensure that someone faces the full consequences of their choices without the safety net that has allowed them to avoid accountability. Marcus wanted his inheritance accelerated because he thought I'd be dead soon anyway. Instead, he discovered that some things die much sooner than others, and trust, once broken by casual cruelty and systematic betrayal, dies faster than anything else. But love, real love that serves others and creates lasting positive impact, lives forever in the scholarships that continue educating deserving students, the small businesses that continue creating jobs, and the community development projects that continue improving lives long after the people who funded them are gone. Now I'm curious about you, my readers. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting values that matter more than blood relationships? How do you handle situations where someone you love becomes someone whose behavior you can't enable? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the courage it takes to do what's right, even when it breaks your heart. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone that their actions have consequences, even when that lesson costs them everything they thought they deserved. And remember, inheritance isn't about biology or birth order. Inheritance is about character, values, and the wisdom to understand that great wealth should serve great purposes. Duchess understood that instinctively, even without words or complex planning. That's why she was worthy of inheriting millions, while Marcus was worthy of inheriting nothing but the consequences of his choices.